So welcome to another edition of Building Peace during the pandemic, and we're really honored today to receive Andrew Tomlinson, who is the director of the UN Quaker office in New York. And Andrew not only heads the UN office, the UN Quaker office in New York, but also the office has been playing a really critical role in convening and facilitating the dialogue between the UN and civil society organizations. From your point of view, from your perspective, what has been the main challenges that this pandemic has brought about the global community of peace builders that you work with, that you support around the world?
Peace building, as we see it, is the process of building more peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. Peace building is carried out by young people, by women and men in their own communities all over the world, in big countries and in small ones. And at all levels, the pandemic has made this much harder. Governments at a local and national level are fighting to find the resources they need to combat the virus, while struggling to offset the damage that's being done to their economies. And at a national and an international level, politicians, business leaders, and policymakers have had a hard time finding consensus on a unified way forward to address the spread of COVID-19 and its impacts. Within countries, in many cases, economic and political elites have moved to protect their own interests first. And at the international level, many developed countries have understandably perhaps focused inwardly, applying vast resources, but to address the needs of their own citizens. Furthermore, while COVID-19 and its economic effects have had a direct impact on human lives, some actions by governments and others are making things worse. Responses to crisis that increase violence, injustice, and exclusion, that set aside human dignity, that seek to divide us for political or economic gain, will tend to exacerbate development losses and human suffering.
When you look at the global peace building field, are there some new opportunities that have opened up?
So we see the spread of COVID-19 itself, and of course the suffering caused and its economic impact as like the first level of crisis. But there is another level of crisis, and perhaps the deeper and more urgent one, which affects the societies as a whole. And the coronavirus has made it very clear that the political and economic ordering of our communities and societies, the ways in which we address differences and process grievances, at every level, is very fragile in the face of stress, and perhaps has been becoming more so, not less, in recent years. And so this is a problem, right? Because it may turn out that the coronavirus is just a foretaste of the disruptions that may arise in the years to come, including from climate change and environmental degradation, growing inequalities and exclusion. And so if we're going to meet those challenges, then we've got to find ways of responding and sort of recommitting to building peace today. So a big opportunity now is to connect the global short-term response to COVID-19 to the long-term insights of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, right? So trying to create the possibility of both achieving a more effective humanitarian response while contributing to longer-term peace and development goals, right? Now there's an opportunity to connect humanitarian and crisis response to the longer-term planning and strategy, to something that would actually more sustainably create change and more robust and resilient societies. And this is the opportunity to do it because things are sadly likely, unless we respond very quickly, particularly on the climate change, environmental degradation front, things are likely to get worse, and we're going to need those skills even more than we do now. We've got to develop those muscles now.
what do you think the UN could do better or more in this context? Both, of course, the UN in New York and its, let's say, the political forum that the UN is, but also its agencies, funds, and programs on the ground.
So we do very much support the Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire, but we think there's more that can be done to actually step aside from the machinery of war. That ceasefire efforts can be expanded, to make the choice to avoid all forms of violent coercion. Military spending can and should be reduced. It's a very easy way to think, gosh, where can this funding come from? Military spending is discretionary spending and can be treated like that. Nuclear weapons should absolutely be eliminated, and the Secretary Generals have called for this as well. And that would immediately free up critical resources. But also within countries, governments can just avoid things like using state violence as a response to large-scale unemployment and displacement. If the heart of the discussion is about finding effective ways to align the humanitarian response of the UN and other actors to longer-term peace and development, then what does that look like? How do we do that in practice? And how does the UN do that? And I think one immediate potential point of entry that was picked up in this call to action from over 170 peacebuilding organizations was the recommendations that guidance can be issued for the UN system to prioritize conflict-sensitive and risk-informed approaches, right? And that's both in the planning and the monitoring of all activities taken to address COVID-19. And then to make sure that they also align with the relevant longer-term plans to foster peace, justice, and inclusion within the development frameworks. So it's sort of two levels. There's just conflict sensitivity, and then it's actually really trying to tie in with these longer-term efforts, which already are underway in many of these societies. That call to action has a specific recommendation that 5% of the funding for COVID-19 response. And of course, at a UN level, there are a number of different large trust funds, whether multi-donor or others. I mean, there's billions and billions of dollars here being applied. Take 5% of that funding to ensure that conflict-sensitive and risk-informed approaches are mainstreamed.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew. It's been really good to speak with you, and thank you again for the great work that the Quaker office does in New York.